We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Beis and Meseches Bava Metzia. This is Bava Metzia Daf 32b. The Gemara continues a statement of Rava. Rava says, Midivrei Shneim Nilmad. From both of them we learn. Rashi explains, Midivrei Shneim Midakamri Tarvayu Prika Adifa. Both the Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon are saying that unloading is better. Meaning both the Tanakama and Rabbi Shimon agree that if the Torah had said loading, we could make a kal v'chomer. If you have to help the owner load his animal, so for sure you have to help the owner unload his animal. And so therefore we can learn from both of them. Midivrei Shneim Nilmad Sar Balei Chaim Doraisa. So we can learn from both of them that Sar Balei Chaim is a Doraisa concept because that is the kal v'chomer. The kal v'chomer is that if I have to help load the animal, there is no Sar Balei Chaim. So certainly where there is Sar Balei Chaim, I certainly have to help to unload the animal. That shows that Sar Balei Chaim is a Doraisa concept. And the Gemara says, V'afilu Rabbi Shimon lo kamer. Now even Rabbi Shimon, he's only saying Elam Mishum Delo Masai Mikrai. The only reason he's not making a kal v'chomer is because he's saying if it only said one pasuk, we wouldn't know if the pasuk is talking about loading or unloading. Aval Masai Mikra Darshina kal v'chomer. But if we were able to identify and say this pasuk is talking about loading, we would make a kal v'chomer. And so that's why the Gemara is saying Mishamai. Now what is the kal v'chomer? Why is it that unloading is so much more obvious? Lav Mishum Tsar Balei Chaim. Isn't it because of Tsar Balei Chaim? Darshina. That's why we make the drasha. You see that Tsar Balei Chaim is a doraisa concept. That's why we make the kal v'chomer. If you have to load, you certainly would have to unload because there it involves Tsar Balei Chaim. The Gemara says no. Dilma maybe Mishum Deika Chisarn Kiss. Maybe the kal v'chomer has nothing to do with Tsar Balei Chaim. Maybe it's because by unloading there's a loss of money. You have damage over there to the animal when the animal is bearing a large burden. So it might be saying as follows: Umatiina de lesba chisarn kiss. When it comes to loading where there is no loss of money, chayiv, you're obligated to help the owner. So prika de isba chisarn kiss. When you're talking about unloading where there is a loss of money, lo kol shekain. So certainly in such a situation you certainly have to help the owner. So maybe it has nothing to do with Tsar Balei Chaim. But the Gemara continues, Utiina ein b'chisarn kiss. Does loading really not involve a loss of money? Milo askinan da'adohachi v'hachi batal mishuke. Aren't we talking about a situation where if the animal is not loaded, he's not going to be able to go to the marketplace to lose out on money? Inami also ganvi v'shakli kol ma'deika v'adei. Or maybe thieves will come and they'll steal everything that he has. And so therefore it could be there's a loss of money by both loading and unloading. And the Gemara continues, Teda, you should know that Tsar Balei Chaim Doraisa, that Tsar Balei Chaim is Doraisa. The Katani Seifa, because it says at the end of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yossi Aglili Yomer, Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, if the animal is overburdened, the Ein Zakik, so then you don't have to deal with it, you don't have to help the owner. Shenemar, as it says, Tachas Maso, it says under its burden, Maso Sheyachol Lamodbo, it means that it's a burden that the animal is able to withstand. Now that was Rabbi Yossi Aglili's opinion. Lav Mechlal the Tanakama Savar Zakik, doesn't that imply that the Tanakama holds that even if it's overburdened, you have to help unload the animal? My time, and what's the reason? La mishum that Tsar Balei Chaim Doraisa. Isn't it because Tsar Balei Chaim is Doraisa? Meaning the Tanakama is saying that regardless of the pasuk, that doesn't make a difference. There's an obligation to help unload the animal because Tsar Balei Chaim is a Doraisa. Isn't that what the Tanakama would respond to Rabbi Yossi Haglili? But the Gemara says not necessarily. Dilma b'tachas maso pligi. Maybe there's just a machlokas. How do you understand the term tachas maso? The Rabbi Yossi holds darshin on tachas maso masay sheyachol lamad. But Rabbi Yossi understands, what does it mean tachas maso? It means a burden that the animal is able to withstand. For Rabbanan Savrin, the Rabbanan hold lo darshin on tachas maso. We don't make such a drasha of tachas maso, and maybe it has nothing to do with Tsar Balei Chaim being doraisa. And the Gemara says, Teda, you should know that Tsar Balei Chaim lav doraisa. We'll prove to you that Tsar Balei Chaim is not doraisa. The Katani Reisha, because it says at the beginning of the Mishnah, halach v'yashav lo v'yamar lo hoel v'yolecha mitzvah lifrok parok. If the owner sits down and he says, since you have a mitzvah to unload, you unload, I'm not going to help you. So it says Potter, it says that the person is exempt from unloading the animal. Shenemar imo, because it says he has to do it with him and with the owner. Visal gadaydach Tsar Balei Chaim doraisa. Now if it enters your mind that Tsar Balei Chaim is doraisa, mali isei lemari bahadei or mali kilesei lemari bahadei. What difference is it if the owner is helping him or if the owner is not helping him? He should have to do it because of Tsar Balei Chaim. But the Gemara says that's not necessarily a proof. Liolam Tsar Balei Chaim doraisa. It could be Tsar Balei Chaim is doraisa. Misavrid Potter legarmi. Do you think that it means that if the owner isn't helping, he's totally Potter? He's not totally Potter. V'dilma Potter bechina. Maybe he's Potter from doing it for free. V'chai b'schar, but he has to do it, and he'll just get paid. He'll be paid wages for what he's doing. According to that interpretation, the Torah would be saying as follows: Ki isei lemari b'hadei aved gabei bechinam. If the owner is with him, then he has to do it with him for free. V'chi lasei lemari b'hadei aved gabei b'schar. And if the owner is not helping him, so then he does it, but he gets paid for what he is doing. Uliolam Tsar Balei Chaim doraisa. And according to that interpretation, it could be that Tsar Balei Chaim is midoraisa. And the Gemara continues, Lema Mesayale, let's say that the following bryce is a proof to Rava that Tzar Ba'alei Chaim is Doraisa. Behemas Ovid Kochavim Metafel Bo Behemas Yisrael. It says, let's say the animal belongs to a non-Jew, and we're talking about unloading the animal. You have to deal with that animal just like the animal of a Jew. And so the Gemara says it's a proof to Rava. Yamrit B'Shlam Tzar Ba'alei Chaim Doraisa. If you say correctly that Tzar Ba'alei Chaim is Doraisa Mishum Hachim Metafel Bo Behemas Yisrael. That's why you have to deal with it as if it was an animal that belonged to a Jew. The fact that it belongs to a non-Jew does not matter, because the issue over here is Tzar Ba'alei Chaim. Eloi Yamrit Tzar Ba'alei Chaim Lav Doraisa. But if you're going to say that Tzar Ba'alei Chaim is not Doraisa, Amai Metafel Bo Behemas Yisrael. Why do you have to treat it like an animal that belongs to a Jew over here by an animal that belongs to a non-Jew? If there's no issue of Tzar Ba'alei Chaim, why is it that you have to unload the animal? And the Gemara answers to that, Hasam Mishum Eva, could be over there. The reason is we don't want to engender hatred between the Jews and the non-Jews, and so therefore you have to help the animal of a non-Jew as well, and it could be that Tzar Ba'alei Chaim is not Midoraisa. And the Gemara says, Hachanam Mistabra, it makes sense to say that the issue over there is Eva, to Katani, because then it says, if the animal is burdened with wine that was used for idolatry, with wine that is prohibited, so then you don't have to help unload the animal. And so the Gemara says, if you're going to say that Tzar Ba'alei Chaim is not Midoraisa, Misham Hachi Ein Zakagla, that's why you don't deal with it in the situation where there's Yayin Aser. Eli Amr Doraisa, but if you're going to say Tzar Ba'alei Chaim is Doraisa, Amay Ein Zakagla, why won't you deal with it even if it's a situation of Yayin Aser? You should still unload the animal because there's an issue there of Tzar Ba'alei Chaim. And so the Gemara says that's not necessarily a proof, because it could be what the end of the Bryce is saying is as follows. Ula hatina yayin aser ein zakakla. It could be that the end of the Bryce is not talking about unloading at all. It's talking about loading the animal, to load the animal with yayin aser, so then you don't have to deal with it. You're not obligated to help load the animal. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, the following proof from a Bryce, Behemas Ovid Kochavim. Let's say the animal belongs to a non-Jew, Umasu Yisrael, and the burden belongs to a Jew, V'chadalta. So then you refrain, then you don't have to, you can forego the obligation, you don't have to unload the animal. And so the Gemara says, V'yamrit Tzar Ba'alei Chaim Doraisa. Now, if you say Tzar Ba'alei Chaim is Midoraisa, so here, what difference does it make that it's an animal of a non-Jew? Amai v'chadalta, why is it that you're foregoing the obligation? Azov ta'azov miboile. It should be that you should surely help to unload the animal anyway. The fact that it's saying that if the animal is a non-Jew, it belongs to a non-Jew, you don't have to deal with it. So that sounds like we're saying Tzar Ba'alei Chaim is not Midoraisa. And the Gemara says, no, liolam Tzar Ba'alei Chaim Doraisa. It could be that Tzar Ba'alei Chaim is Midoraisa, and if it would be an animal that had a burden on it, you would have to unload the animal, even though the animal belongs to a non-Jew. But Hasam B'Te'ina, but it could be that over there we're talking about loading the animal. And so it's saying in a situation where the animal belongs to a non-Jew, and the burden belongs to a Jew, so then it's saying, V'chadalta, you don't need to load the animal in that situation, and that's because there is no issue of Tzar Ba'alei Chaim. But the Gemara says, Yihachi, if so, if that's the case, Ema Seifa, let's look at the end of that same Brisa. Behemas Yisrael, let's say the animal belongs to a Jew, Umasay Ovid Kochavim, the reverse case, the burden belongs to a non-Jew, and the animal belongs to a Jew, Azov Tazov, so then it says that you actually do have to participate, you do have to help. So now, V'ibeti'ina, now if we're talking over here about loading the animal, Amai Azov Tazov, so why are we saying over here that you have to help out and load the animal? Why would we suddenly say that if the animal belongs to a Jew and the burden belongs to a non-Jew, then you have to help, but the other way around, you don't have to help? It doesn't make sense to make a distinction. And so the Gemara answers, well, Misham Tzara Yisrael. The reason over there why it's different is because you have the Jewish donkey driver. He has to sit there and wait for this guy to load up the animal, so that's already a pain for the Jewish person. That's why we're talking about loading, but we don't want the Jew to have to wait, so you have to help out. The Gemara says, Yachiv, so Afilu Reisha Nami. And the Reisha also, isn't the Jew over there with his burden, and he has to sit around there waiting? Why do you have to help out over there? And the Gemara answers, no, Reisha Bechamor Ovid Kochavim. The difference is as follows. In the Reisha, where the animal belongs to the non-Jew, it's the non-Jew that's sitting around waiting. He's the one leading the donkey. Seifa Bechamor Yisrael. And at the end of the Brisa, we're talking about where it's an animal owned by a Jew. The Jew is the one waiting around. There you have to help out. The Gemara says, well, my psakt, well, who says? Why do we have to say that in the Reisha it's a non-Jew over there, and in the Seifa it's a Jew over there? And the Gemara says it makes sense. Stamad de Milsa, Inish Basar Chamri Yazal. It makes sense to say that in general people follow their animals. They follow the donkey. So whoever owns the donkey is the one that's over there waiting. So again, that's the difference between the Reisha and the Seifa. But the Gemara continues, V'chadalta v'azov tazo. But this entire answer we're giving is assuming this Bryce is talking about loading the animal. But that doesn't make sense with the psukim, because V'chadalta and azov tazov, all of those psukim, Beprika hu dechsive, they're actually talking about unloading the animal. So you have to forget everything we just said. Clearly the Bryce is talking about unloading the animal, and the Bryce is making a distinction. The Bryce is saying that if it's the animal of a non-Jew, so then in that situation you do not have to unload. And if it's the animal of a Jew, apparently you do have to unload. And so therefore, again, by making that distinction, doesn't that show that Tzar Ba'alei Chaim is not Doraisa? And the Gemara says, you're right. Amar Lei said back to him, Hamani Rabbi Yossi Haglili. He'll have to answer that this brisa follows Rabbi Yossi Haglili. We did say it was machlokas before, and Rabbi Yossi Haglili do Amar Tzar Balei Chaim lav doraisa. Rabbi Yossi Haglili happens to hold that Tzar Balei Chaim is not a doraisa idea, and so therefore the distinction is as follows. Again, if the animal is owned by a non-Jew and the burden is a Jew, it's on top of the animal, you don't need to unload it because we're not concerned with the animal of the non-Jew. There's no issue with Tzar Balei Chaim. We're following Rabbi Yossi Haglili, and again, we're not concerned with any loss to the animal of the non-Jew, so you don't have to help. But if the animal belongs to a Jew and the masa, the burden belongs to an Ovid Kochavim, so now already the animal of the Jew has this burden on it. That's already not an issue of Tzar Balei Chaim, but it's an issue that it's the animal of the Jew that could be being damaged over here, so you have to help to unload the animal. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from the following brisa, Oev lifrok v'sonei liton. Let's say a person encounters his friend needs help unloading the animal, and also he encounters his enemy who needs help loading the animal. So the brisa says, mitzvah v'sonei, the mitzvah is to help out his enemy, kedei lachaf es yitzro, that's in order to conquer his yetzer hara, it's better to help out the sonei. And the Gemara says, now if it enters your mind that Tzar Balei Chaim is a doraisa idea, so ha'adiflei, it'd actually be better to unload the animal of his friend because he's taking care of the Tzar Balei Chaim. And the Gemara says, not necessarily. Nevertheless, it could be to conquer one's yetzer hara is even greater than Tzar Balei Chaim, even if Tzar Balei Chaim is midoraisa, and that's why you have to help load the animal of your enemy. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here, the following proof, Sonei Sha'amra, when we talk about a Sonei, now right now the Gemara thinks we're talking about the Sonei in the Pasuk. The Pasuk says you have to help unload the animal of your enemy. So that when we're talking about Sonei, it's Sonei Yisrael, v'lo Sonei Ovid Kochavim. We're talking about an enemy who is Jewish, not an enemy who is non-Jewish. You're helping this Jewish person to unload his animal, even though this person is your enemy. And so the Gemara says, Yamrit Tzar Balei Chaim doraisa. Now if you say that Tzar Balei Chaim is midoraisa, Mali Sonei Yisrael, Mali Sonei Ovid Kochavim, well, what difference does it make if it's an enemy who's Jewish or an enemy who's not Jewish? You should still help to unload the animal because Tzar Balei Chaim is doraisa. The fact that we're making a distinction shows that Tzar Balei Chaim is not doraisa. And the Gemara says, Misaver asoni dekra koi. Do you think that the sonei that we're talking about in this brisa is the sonei of the pasuk by unloading the animal? No. Asoni demasnisim koi. We're going on the enemy that's mentioned in the brisa above. The brisa said that if there's a friend that needs unloading and there's an enemy that needs loading, you should do the loading. That enemy that we're talking about is a Jewish person. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here the following proof. And Rashi explains, Sonei Sha'amru, again the Brisa said the enemy that we're talking about, Kasal Gadaydach Sonei Sha'amru Asonei Dekrakoi. Initially the Gemara thinks we're talking about the enemy in the Pasuk. The Mishtoi Beprika, that's talking about unloading. It says, Kisira Chamor Sona'acha Rovetz. If you see the donkey of your enemy and it's crouching beneath its burden. But then the Gemara answered, no, Asonei Demasnisin Koi, Ahach Masnisa Dil'el. We're going on the enemy mentioned in the Brisa earlier, the Sonei Liton, who that you should help the enemy, you should help them to load his animal. We will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Gimel Amud Aleph.